opinion. That's pretty logical. And so they've got a date. But then again, would say, with that, at that point, they would start the next cycle, the next 5,123 years and 128 days. So there'll be another cycle. In fact, there's been another calendar found. There's only been 2 calendars ever found. One was in the Dresden Codex. That's the one everybody's been using. And the other one was just recently at a place called Chiltún in Guatemala, where they found one that went to 17 Baktuns, which is 17.0.0.0 instead of 13, which would give us another 1,124 years. It would take us to 3136 when we would postpone the same thing we're doing now, end of the world scenarios. So, am I giving you too much information?
No, go ahead. It's what I'm trying to get to is dispelling that fear aspect that
I'm getting to that.
Gotcha. I'm with you.
And I mean recently, like 2 months ago, there was only one place in all the Maya, like 40,000 monuments, where the date was written. It was at a place called Tortuguero in Mexico, and it was on a stele, and it said, on this date, 13.0.0, he was a minor god, and I can't remember his name right now, he shall come down and get dressed. Well, that was a nice message, because he's coming down to get dressed for what? A party, because that's New Year's, etc. So people have been debating over what he's getting dressed for. Yeah, the modern Maya they don't use that calendar anymore. They, since they were converted to European methodologies, they've used the same Gregorian calendar that we all use. So there's been no portentous time about December 21st, or portentous forecast about December 21st in the Maya world. And I've been watching NASA alerts on asteroids, satellites, and there doesn't seem to be any bothering us. Or there's some that might hit in another 4,000 years, but we're looking for something that will come in the next 3 months or so. And my research into earthquakes and the polar shift, and this, I'm not kidding, I've really spent time on this. It doesn't show any increasing incident of large earthquakes. And the polar shift, it did move 3 inches in 2004 when they had that huge earthquake in Indonesia. They called it a tsunami, killed all those people, 250,000 folks.
Right.
But they can calculate this. The Earth has been, and the axis have been very stable based on its position with the rest of the Earth, not the wobble, or that still goes on in a 25,800 year cycle. So I have not seen any indications, and archaeologists who study this have not seen any indication. NASA doesn't see any indication of doom or disaster on that day, and it's made me opine that the worst thing you have to fear on the morning of December 21st is you've only got 4 more shopping days till Christmas.
And that is a truism.
It's true. It's true.
It is a truism.
The only guy that had ever argued with me was a really wise guy, archaeologist, said, I don't agree. I said, why? He said, I'm a bachelor. I only need one. That was as good a comeback as I've gotten.
And he just needs to go to Walgreens. He can get it done all at
right.
once. All right. I have a question for you. Now, the Mayans are, like you had said, is one of the 5 original written languages and script languages, and I find that is a fascinating aspect. It's one of the most compelling aspects that really gives the Mayans the credibility that they deserve in regard to being a pioneer in regard to civilized culture. Now, big question here, Jim. How did they know what they know? Where did they get this information?
That's the title of epistemography. It was the study of how do we know what we know, and I took that And chapter 3 was, how did they know what they knew? And exactly what you just asked. That men in a civilized, organized, intelligent group, I'm talking about men and women, I'm talking about man as a civilized.
I gotcha.
Seem to have periods in their civilization when they need something. It's called comparative analysis in anthropology. And there's time when you like studying the stars and counting them, and what's the name of the star again up there? And God, let's write it down. You need writing, you need mathematics, and you need astronomy, and you need how to make tools, and you need how to build buildings, and these things are natural. The Maya didn't invent cities, but they really loved them because they had 50 of them in their 125,000 50 city-states. I mean, there was more than 50 cities because the big city was there, and they had smaller cities in each of these. In an area that's about the size of New Mexico. So that's a lot of cities, but they didn't have, they set the cities up so they only had like 3 days walking distance between them. And it was a very convenient methodology. And so they had the cities, and so they needed what city folk need. This sounds like curly and risky business. But anyway, they needed water because they knew they had well, first of all, they needed buildings. They needed streets. They needed drainage. They needed garbage removal. They needed water badly because there was, in the 6 months of dry season, there was no lakes or rivers, very few in the Yucatan because and I missed this completely. The platform of the Yucatan is a very thin layer of soil that rides on top of a 3,000 or 4,000 thick layer of limestone. And the top layers, it's what's called karstic limestone, and it's a porous limestone. So rain, it's described 6 months a year, rains very hard. It didn't run down into gullies and into rivers and streams and into rivers and into lakes. It went right into the ground, maybe a little runoff, hit the rock, and the rock sucked it right in because like a sponge. And it went right down to the famous, it's called the Yucatan aquifer, the groundwater, which moved it swiftly out to sea and into the Caribbean Sea. And one of the things that's amazing, they had to save water, but out at sea, maybe 100, 200 yards out, there's actually springs bubbling up of fresh water in the middle of this salt water. So the people on the coast had two ways to get water. They had the water coming from the bubbling up of springs and these natural wells called cenotes, but I'm getting ahead of myself. So we're talking about where did they come up with all their science? We talked about that. And the technology. The technology was a need to feed people and get them water. And water was the number one need for people and for agriculture to make it grow and enable it to, well, with the advances in agricultural methods they had, they were able to grow 4 times the amount of food on the same land that they could have done with conventional methods. So they were way ahead and built this, we'll get ahead of myself again, big 15 million population that's on land that should have only been able to support 2 million. So they had to keep the water and the agricultural levels high in order to feed the people, plus have plenty of food for export. And they were big exporters, and trade was a big business with the Mayas. So getting back to how did they come up with the stuff, it was a matter of need. They needed something. And like I said, they had time. They had time to start doing these cities, building these cities 300 BC, the big cities. And they worked at it for 1,200 years. And that's a long time to, I guess they changed some design, but all the basic stuff, the way they got water, the way they stored water, the way they built their buildings, the structure was the same. However, the outside looked different because there were regional styles in the local archaeological and artistic styles that differed widely. But there was always very fine carvings and stonework that was involved with the facades of these buildings. So the answer is, when they had a need, they worked on it, and they finally got it right.
Okay, so I'm going to interject a little bit because my next question is going to have your architectural, analytical brain spinning. There's many theories out there that a lot of our ancient civilizations were in contact with a higher intelligence or possibly alien intelligence. Is there any indication on any of the information you have found or you're aware of in your 40 years of excavating that is a possibility?
We're not really, because as a civil engineer, we're the field of engineering that takes care of water and bridges and roads and buildings, and even we design the structures for rocket ships. So we take it from the basic all the way up to the top. So I've looked at things that I've examined closely from a technical point of view, and everything that they've done was, I think, homegrown and born in the Yucatan. But we're talking about the hard science. We're talking about the buildings and their structures and the water storage systems and the roads and the tools and even their giant canoes that applied the seas. But the thinkers, the intellectuals that were really deep into the belief system of the quadripartite cosmic philosophy. Now I'm only dabbled in this, so I'm not deep into it. Believe they could do teleportation, out-of-body experiences, distant viewing. I think I'm using the right terms for your
right. You are.
And
yes.
Actually, John Lloyd Stevens, when he wrote his book, claims he witnessed one of these distant viewings through a crystal ball. Yes, but nobody's ever found a crystal ball. Crystal skulls, yes, but we don't know about those guys. But there was a belief in the priests and the higher up that they could actually travel, and they did have something else working for them. Okay, and this helped in astronomy. They had 100 different hallucinogens that were natural that they developed. And they would, what do you want? What do you need? It's like the old days in Greenwich Village when I was going to graduate school, in the 60s. So, but the Europeans only had 50 drugs at that time when they landed. But we're talking about way before the Europeans ever got there. So they had, let's say, added value. That plus the fact that they would do bloodletting sacrifices. I'm talking about killing somebody else. I'm talking about actually piercing a tender part of your body that would bleed well, and actually getting faint and having these drugs. And this is a state when they saw their ancestors and saw the vision serpent and could tell the future or see the past. This comes from the books and stuff like that. So I never had a chance to use any of this stuff, and I will not pierce my penis for anybody. I don't believe in bloodletting that way. I would maybe do a thumb or something like that, but that was a big deal. It's particularly for the royals in bloodletting ceremonies, and they could see. You see this in the sculptures, the carvings, the bas-reliefs, where you'll see a person looking up at a serpent with a face coming out, which is a relative speaking to them. But they believed. That's all I can say.
And so in their faith and in their belief, you believe that they maybe have tapped into some collective consciousness or some awareness that may have helped them develop some of these things? Is that what you're saying, or do you think it was more of a collective group?
It was really, really good stuff, and they gathered a big group of scientists. They may have needed more buildings or better buildings or something like that. So that would have promoted the lifestyle more than the basics. I'm only talking about the basics in the book: water, roads, buildings, etc. But I think the way they lived was probably absolutely determined by some of these visions.
And okay, and so let's get into some of the the incredible inventions